our platform that we launched very recently called Team Up for Unity, which is to have discussions and give the voice and a platform to eradicate racism in sports on Long Island, and to encourage people to speak up about it, people to be able to talk about something that is not easy to talk about, but we want to have the conversation. I wanted to introduce my friend and colleague, Jackie Wilson, the second. He is the executive director of diversity and inclusion for our company, BSE Global. Jackie oversees all of our diversity and inclusion strategies and initiatives. He helps to develop and execute the company's overall social justice vision. He works closely with BSE's Diversity Council and collaborates with all departments across the company, including all of the employee resource groups called ERGs. Jackie joined in 2020. He joined BSE Global with tremendous experience focused on recruitment and growth of diverse talent, as well as establishing corporate and community programs related to diversity and inclusion. He began his career as a litigation associate at Graham Curtin, and after a few years, his love of sports led him to be general counsel for All Sports, All Pro Sports and Entertainment, a sports agency based in New York City, where he served as a certified player agent. At All Pro, he was charged with spearheading the social responsibility efforts of professional athletes, helping them to identify areas of need in their communities and establishing charitable foundations that address those issues while also overseeing the implementation of community programming. After 5 years at All Pro, Jackie followed his entrepreneurial dreams and his passion for fitness into the health and wellness space, first as general manager of a major fitness brand, and then as founder and CEO of Nova Fitness Innovation. As a Black entrepreneur, Jackie's not only focused on diversity and inclusion within his own company, but also participated in the efforts to help other minority entrepreneurs break the barriers he and his professional athlete clients have faced. He is a proud graduate of Duke University, where he earned a BA, a Bachelor of Arts in Public Policy, with a minor degree in African American Study, and he holds a Juris Doctorate. For those of us that are laymen, he is a lawyer from Notre Dame Law School. We are proud to introduce and welcome Jackie to our call tonight. And Jackie, thank you for joining us. From here, I am going to turn over the conversation to our young hosts, Jaden Keeley and Amaya McMillan. But Jackie, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. Looking forward to today's conversation.
So, without further ado, Jaden Keeley and Amaya McMillan are our hosts for this evening. Jaden, you want to introduce yourself? Amaya, you want to introduce yourself? And let's get rolling with your questions. Jaden, over to you first.
I'll start off. So excuse my dog. So I'm a senior at Center Merchants High School. And part of the reason why I joined Team Up for Unity is because I believe it's important to build the foundation at a very young age to better society and to have that view going forward as an adult.
Hi guys, my name is Amaya McMillan and I am from Nassau County and I go to Valley Stream North High School. The sports I'm a part of is both winter and spring track, and I also participate in kick line, step, and BSU. For those of you who don't know, that's the Black Student Union, which just exists to promote and enhance Black education. I decided that this would be a great opportunity for me to be a part of, because throughout high school, I realized that I truly did have a passion for, Black inequities and just researching the Black experience in America. So because I'm a part of all these different things, I thought it would just be a really cool idea and just a really cool experience to combine two things I love. One of them being, being athletic and being a part of a team sport and working with people that I love and people that that went from teammates now I can be able to call family, and then combining that with being able to eliminate the bias present for people of color. So we just wanted to jump right into the questions. And as our conversation progresses, we'll be talking about Mr. Jackie Wilson II as his role as a leader, entrepreneur, and role model. But we want to start off this conversation with unfolding who Jackie Wilson is simply as a person. I was wondering if you could give us a brief insight into what you would like us to know about you.
Yes, first of all, thank you. It's very, very nice to meet both of you guys. I guess the brief intro to me is I am a husband, father, lawyer, athlete, sports executive who is passionate about sports and issues of diversity and inclusion.
Great. Next, I would just like to ask you, what drives you to be a part of the fight against social injustices? I believe many choose to give their opinions, but very few take action. So a man who's very involved in various organizations for change, who are some mentors or role models that you look up to?
Yeah, so I grew up in a house that preached to whom much is given, much is required. And within that, participating in the fight for equality, social justice, and really just the creation of a just society is something that has always driven me. I've been lucky enough to have several role models that have shaped my thinking. My former boss was, the first Black super agent, Lamont Smith, and he was very big on encouraging athletes that we worked with to use their platforms for greater good. One of the things that we did was everyone that we represented, we encouraged them to start charitable foundations in either the city in which they played or where they were from. And so working with him, really showed me the value of creating foundations and bringing awareness to issues. My current boss and friend, John Abdumani, challenges me in a different way. He challenges me to take a holistic approach to issues of diversity and inclusion and incorporate them in a manner that not only creates a greater good, but also ties into the business and fabric of the organization. And then there's, role models that I haven't even met, like Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell, who remind me of the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, the time is always right to do what is right, even if that comes with some level of sacrifice or consequence. So to your point, taking action, instead of just using words, I've always been surrounded by and motivated by people that encourage me to get off the sidelines and actually get into the game.
Thank you so much for that thought out response. I think it, like you said, is really interesting that you talked about the idea of different people playing a role in your life, whether they're, actually in your life or people that you just look up to. And I think it's interesting that you talked about, including diversity and inclusion and actually taking action. So we just wanted to go into our next question. And as Mr. Alton mentioned previously, you are a graduate from Duke University and Notre Dame Law School, which I think is really cool, by the way. I want to be a lawyer. So I was just curious to know, through your years of education, both during and after college, when was that aha moment? When did you realize your passion was to combine your love for sports and diversity and inclusion?
Well, the first part is easy. Sports is my first love. And I'm still very, very much in love with sports, second only to my wife and kids. I struggle to think of something that I love more than sports. But issues of diversity and inclusion for me, gained in importance as a consequence of my life. I grew up playing tennis in Atlanta, Georgia. And as a Black tennis player, I was oftentimes, one of one. And so I learned the value of, diversity and inclusion and having people that look like you around at a very early age, because my mother, helped recruit, my friends and other kids that look like me to join the tennis team simply so I wouldn't be alone. And then when I was a student at Duke University, I was one of the few people of color on the undergraduate judicial board. And that's important because that undergraduate judicial board helps to determine disciplinary actions for students. And so it's supposed to be a jury of your peers. And so not having, representation on that board was something that was, very important to me. And so, I led initiatives to make sure that we increased diversity, within that. But then diversity on the sports, aha moment, it probably happened during my first year of law school at Notre Dame. I was there when we had our first ever Black head coach, Tyrone Willingham. He was also the only coach in Notre Dame history to be fired before living out his, full 5-year contract, which was kind of an unwritten rule at Notre Dame that everybody got their first 5-year contract. Well, Tyrone did not. And, that was a trigger moment for me. And so I participated in campus conversations and helped, to push for diversity amongst, coaches, faculty, and staff at Notre Dame. And then, aha moments of today. I think that that a lot of issues that we see in the sports world, can really be helped by having different people, of different backgrounds in the room. Representation has always been important, and we see the benefits all around, but having different people in a room not only adds creativity and innovation, but it leads to a pipeline of others, entering the space, looking to participate. People aspire to what they see. So the more diversity that we have on sports on the business side of things, the more people will be encouraged to look beyond just playing and explore careers, in the front office and on the business side as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you touched on some really great points. And I know you had mentioned it briefly early on when you were speaking. But if you couldn't, tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing, and how you think that it shaped your views on diversity and equality today that you apply every.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, which was very much the segregated South. So I grew up in environments that were neither diverse or inclusive. The high school that I went to had about 4,000 students, and 97% of them, if not more, looked like me. But on the flip side, I also spent time being bused to the north side of Atlanta, where the only students in my school that looked like me were the other students that were bused to the north side of Atlanta. And that really created difficulty at times. But it really shaped my thoughts on diversity and establishing common ground. Because while I was bused to the other side of town, I was learning the value and importance of networking and building relationships beyond just the Black community. And so I truly believe that, this was one of the reasons why I was able to thrive at Duke and Notre Dame, because that forced experience, taught me something that I wouldn't have gotten had I just stayed on, the south side of Atlanta. And it's, this mentality that I use daily, in my job, to where it's looking to find common ground, have open dialogues, and truly get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
So you touched upon the idea of, hardship that you faced. And I just think, like you said, I think it's really interesting to note that we need to be surrounded by people who don't look like us in order to have a better understanding, and also in order to, try to feel empathetic towards each other and try to live within each other's shoes. So I just wanted to get into that. And as far as like hardships and, and trials and tribulations go, I know that with whatever profession that you choose, or whatever profession anybody chooses, there's going to be hardships and rocky roads. So considering your profession, I was just wondering, have you encountered any situations, for example, dealing with people who did not want to see your vision come through? So people who, they see that, you want to be someone who's implementing the idea of equality and adversity in a sports setting. So anybody that, is kind of against those ideals, and maybe if it's not so bold, maybe they're kind of doing it in a lower key manner or something in that sort. And if you do have an example of this or any short anecdotes of this, can you give us a reason as to why you continue down this path? Why did you continue to do this profession? And when you did continue to do this profession, as you're here, you're doing it today, and you're talking to us about it. How did this make you feel? How did any of these stories or any of these encounters have made you feel?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very good question, and the short answer to that is yes. There are always people that are resistant to change. I mean, we are, unfortunately, all of us are dealing with a power structure that was set up long before us. But digging into the heart of your question, what keeps you going? I mean, it's because this stuff is important. Change isn't easy, and it requires people that are passionate and willing to accept different opinions and have the endurance to keep going. I don't think that this fight is really for everyone to fight in the same manner. And to be honest with you, it's likely not a fight that's meant for everyone to fight at all. But that's okay. And that's where I see, me stepping into this opportunity, because, I am built for this fight. And I think that it's important to have people that champion these causes regardless of the adversity. The role models and mentors that I mentioned before, drive me. Setting the example of fighting for what's right, in front of my sons drives me. But most importantly, like, the fact that I truly believe that I can help create positive change, like, makes me feel like this is something, that I have to do. And so, yes, there are people that are resistant to this. There are people that attempt to stand in the way. And my response to that is, so what? Keep fighting, and let's figure out a way to find the common ground that I discussed earlier, and really collectively get to a better place as a society.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, you had touched on a point before, talking about the power structures that were set before us. And as someone who is a Black entrepreneur, how has your journey been affected by these limitations or barriers from social normalities? And how have they hindered your process of success? And what did you do to overcome these?
So, being an entrepreneur is tough. I mean, it's hard regardless of who you are. Being a Black entrepreneur, to your point, as an additional layer of difficulty that some people think about and some don't. But the biggest challenge that I faced was always the constant feeling of having to prove that you belong. How I dress, speak, walk. It's a constant checks and balances to make sure that one, I'm not intimidating, but two, proving that constantly proving that I deserve to be in the room. And, with that comes a extra burden, burden for lack of a better word, because there's a fear that your success or your failures, really relate to someone else. So, if I don't excel in my role, there's a fear that someone else may not be given, this opportunity. And so, I oftentimes point to Mark Zuckerberg in scenarios like this, because, Mark can walk into a meeting in flip-flops and a t-shirt and receive a level of benefit of the doubt that I'm never getting. But again, you can look at these obstacles and you can be defeated by them, or you can work to fight against them. And so, I try to push back on that, and really try and maintain authenticity and who I am. And so remaining, authentic in how I dress, act, and speak. So, I'm not a suit and tie guy, unless I have to be, but for the most part, I wear sneakers, I wear hoodies, because my dress does not define my intelligence. But I'm also realistic. And so, I'm always concerned about acceptance and, not being taken seriously for my thoughts or experiences. So I don't just wear any hoodies, and sneakers. I wear very nice hoodies and sneakers. And sometimes, I'll put on a button up, with that hoodie, just to make it more acceptable. But the shoes that I wear, the Jordans are just as expensive and nice as the Italian loafers that I wear. And so, I try to, live authentically, so that, the people that I work with, the people that, look up to me, my colleagues, also feel as though, they can be authentic and true in themselves, to be natural, and who they are. Because, I'm not Mark Zuckerberg, I'm Jackie Wilson. But at the end of the day, we both just want to be comfortable in being our true selves.
Something that you spoke about that I think is really important to touch on is just the idea that, people of different socioeconomic backgrounds or even different ethnicities or even different sexual orientations always have that idea of, in the back of their head, can I do this, or is somebody going to look at me a certain way because I do this? So I think that is very interesting that you made that point, that when you compare yourself to like a white man in society, and as you know, in history, as everybody here knows, in history, it's always been white man first and the black man after. So I just think it's really interesting that you feel empowerment to be yourself and do things that are true to yourself and not try to conform into other people's standards. And I think that's something that's really important, because it's going to teach the people below you and the people that you're mentoring to understand that it's okay to be your authentic self. You don't have to live up to anybody else's expectations. And I think that by you saying that, it also transitions into today's topic, which is sports as a life metaphor, as a life metaphor. And furthermore, how do biases and racism show themselves? So first, we just wanted to, thank you so much for that brief introduction into those questions, and just get right into the meeting topic. So, as someone who has a love for and a passion for sports, we're wondering how sports have played a role in your day-to-day life. What are some lessons you have learned from sports that you find yourself using in your everyday life?
As I mentioned before, sports is, one of the loves of my life. And so it is, shaped the way that I think and act. And so some of the lessons that I've learned from sports that I use in my daily life are, teamwork, encouragement, perseverance. My job requires constant collaboration, be that with the various departments within the organization, community leaders, my boss. I need to work with others in a very meaningful way in order to achieve my objectives. So figuring out ways to encourage my teammates and find their drivers so that we can all collaborate on reaching the desired outcome, and fighting through adversity. I won a lot of games playing sports, but also had a lot of losses, and some bigger than others. And so sports taught me that, a loss is a minor setback that should provide teachable moments. And so I live my life based on the premise of not letting one loss, beat me twice. So learn, grow, and just win, baby. That's what I've gotten from sports.
I think those are some great points. Mentioning encouraging others for the common goal, learning from losses, I think are very, very key takeaways, and some great points and advice. So my next question would just be, as someone who inspires and is seen as a role model in the community, what advice can you present to our students who are seeking change within our own communities?
I mean, couple of pieces of advice, and the first one, I would say to be unapologetic about who you are. Don't hide your authentic self, for the comfort of someone else, because a lot of these issues, are related to issues that others have. So they need to solve them, not you. Don't put that burden on yourself. Be authentic and unapologetic about who you are. And the second piece of advice I would say is be an ally. Like, we all know what's right and what's wrong. We feel it, we understand it, we know it when we see it. And for the most part, a lot of people don't engage in the outwardly racist behavior, that we're talking about. But it's not enough that, you don't do something. Like, not enough people actually do something when an incident occurs. And so, paraphrasing Martin Luther King Jr. again, he said that we remember the silence of our friends rather than the actions of our enemies. And so, my advice is, if you see something, like, take an action step. Tell a coach, a parent, a teacher, support the person, in that situation, because silence, hurts more than action sometimes. So if we are all collectively, taking action, we can collectively get to a better place. So those are my two pieces of advice. Be unapologetic in who you are and be an ally to someone else.
Thank you so much for that. Before I go on to my next question, I just wanted to mention that if anyone on the call today has any questions, well, we'll take those now. You guys can put them in the chat. And right when we're done doing our personal questions, we'll get right into your questions. So we have a lot of time to just answer any question that you guys have. So if you guys want to drop them in chat, that would be great. But for now, I'll just go into my next question, which is, we know that you've pursued varying career paths and have had exposure to numerous people and varying circumstances. Do you have any brief personal anecdotes you can give everybody today insight to how racism or bias has revealed itself in the sports world? If so, how did this make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's racism all over sports. You know, as an athlete, you know, I've had coaches and opponents, you know, use derogatory terms, you know, towards me. As a fan, I've sat in the stands and listened as fans shouted things that should never be repeated. And as a sports agent, you know, I've had potential clients tell me that they felt more comfortable having a white agent because teams didn't take Black agents seriously. And so, you know, racism, it exists all throughout society, and sports is no different. And I'd actually argue that the competitive nature of sports tends to bring out a little bit more aggression in all actions, you know, racism included. And so, answering your question about how it made me feel, it made me upset. And it's one of the reasons why I'm sitting here talking with you today, because I am someone who is fueled by things like that. Like I'm not someone who gets upset and just, you know, sits down and accepts that. Like I am unwilling to accept this as, you know, regular behavior. And so I actively look to push against that. And I took a job that allows me to push against stuff like that on a daily basis. And I'm hopefully, you know, setting that level of example for my kids to grow up and push against that on a daily basis, because I'm the child of civil rights activists who pushed against that on a daily basis. So yeah, it upset me, but I used that disappointment and anger to hopefully push for, you know, a better outcome.
I think, yes, I think that's something we could all take away and use going forward in every aspect of our lives. And especially you as someone who's had a great impact, you know, not only within the sports world, but also has invested time in foundations and communities as well. What do you feel are the foundations for sparking change and bettering society, and see as like some of the core things that can really help and we can use and take away to start change?
Yeah, Jaden, I think that it's really like the foundation for sparking change is a collection of like-minded individuals working collectively for a common goal. I mean, we saw that this summer with the protest groups, you know, that were in every city, you know, in America. You know, from the outside looking in, you know, these were some of the most diverse looking groups that were out there. It wouldn't seem like they had a lot in common, but they did. They had a unifying trait, which was they had similar values and similar interests in promoting positive change. And so it is seeking out like-minded individuals who share your passion, share your beliefs, and share your value system, and getting together and collectively pushing, you know, for a better outcome. You know, one person, you know, can spark a movement, but you need allies and you need friends to really put some momentum behind that and push for change. And so, you know, I'd encourage you to, you know, voice your opinions, voice your values, and seek out those, you know, who share that. And now you got a group, and now you can make something happen.
Thank you so much for that. And especially, you know, at BSE Global, I think you have a pretty cool job. You get to be around some professional athletes and some real role models. For someone with that job, what would you say that you've learned from somebody or someone you've been around, whether it's, you know, within the professional sport or someone within the office, who has really inspired you or has taught you something that has changed your views or shaped your views in any type of way?
Man, I would say, Jaden, the list of colleagues that, you know, add some color to situations, is longer than I can name. One of the things that I think that is great with working at BSE Global and working for a great CEO and a great ownership group that truly believes in diversity and issues of social justice is, again, going back to gathering collective, people with collective values. And so, we have people from all different walks of life. And so when you are, in a meeting and thinking about marketing to the borough of Brooklyn, and you have people in that room, of all different ethnicities, all different backgrounds from different places, like, you are sharing perspectives and you are learning on a level that you couldn't if everybody came from the same place. If everybody was from Suffolk County or everybody was from Nassau County, you'd have similar views because you'd have similar upbringings and similar experiences. And so being in a melting pot that is Brooklyn, and working for an organization that is actively working to, add diversity, within the organization and, uplift a diverse community, values and the learning structure, is on an ongoing basis every day.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Me and Jaden have been asking you a whole bunch of questions, and we want to give the people who are watching here a chance to ask questions as well. So, first question I see here in the chat is from Claire Okudi. I'm sorry. I hope I'm saying it right. But she asked, is there a specific quote that you live by and that helps keep you motivated when faced with challenges?
Let's see. Yes. There's a quote from the poem Invictus, which is "Master of my fate, captain of my soul." And so, I believe that my efforts are dictate outcomes. And so, going back to some of these things that we've talked about, accepting issues is not something that I'm built to do. I'm built to challenge and change and promote for a better good. And so that quote constantly reminds me that change is within my grasp. And so that's something that I live by every day.
Great. Okay. Another question someone had asked was, can you provide further information about employee resource groups and what they do?
Sure. So employee resource groups are groups within a company that put together, people of, similar backgrounds or ideologies. So, for example, we have, a Black resource group. So where it's predominantly made up of Black employees. We have a Latinx resource group that is predominantly made up of Latinx, employees, women's resource groups. And so what these groups do is they come together. One, they serve as a place to where people, can come collect ideas and actually promote different changes, within the organization. And so, examples of that would be the women's resource groups, who, one, had a roundtable today to introduce people within the organization, but two, push for different policies that impact, the women within the organization. Maternity leave, for example, is something that was, brought up, and issues, surrounding that would be discussed within the women's resource groups. Any of our Black History Month and Martin Luther King initiatives are things that are traditionally led by our Black resource groups. And so they're groups that, provide a different community within the organization. One, socially, but two, to get together and, create policies or change policies that may appear to be neutral on their face, but discriminatory in practice.
I think that's amazing. The idea of a resource group sounds amazing. And if only you can implement that in everywhere, I think it would make a huge difference. I think just even in schools, some people, some students, and even some teachers, I feel like often don't know who to turn to. They might not feel like they're comfortable with whoever's in charge or whatever the case may be. So I think just the idea of a resource group in every aspect of our life could be a really amazing and life-changing thing. So I think that's really cool, and I'm really grateful that you spoke about that. Someone else in the chat asks, what is your proudest moment?
Proudest moment professionally, proudest moment.
I'm not sure. I mean, I guess you can interpret it however you would like. They didn't interpret it. If they want to comment really quickly what they meant, but if not, you can just, professionally. They said professionally.
I'd say my proudest moment professionally was the day that I joined BSE Global. I like, again, sports has been a passion of mine, my entire life. I grew up wanting to work in the sports industry. I wanted to be a professional athlete. But I've also, hence this conversation, been extremely passionate about issues of diversity, inclusion, social responsibility, and uplifting the community. And so having the opportunity to have a job that literally marries those passions is something that, I couldn't ask for more. And so the ability to be able to impact change on this level and do it in an industry, that I love, is something that I'm extremely proud of. And so, my proudest professional moment to date has been joining this organization. But ask me in a year, and I plan to have some other benchmarks, within this organization that I'm also proud of, because we're working, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Great. Okay. We have a question from Alton, and he had said the sports landscape differs across the country, and Long Island is a big market with a lot of diverse student athletes. Your advice on what students, parents, teachers should do. What advice do you have to denounce racist behaviors?
See something, say something. Again, I think that most of us, if not all of us, know what is right and what is wrong in the moment. You feel it. But people oftentimes don't speak up for a number of different reasons. They may not speak up because they are fearful of retaliation. They may not speak up because they are fearful of what their friends may say. And I encourage folks to get around that. If you don't want to speak up in the moment as it's happening, again, find a teacher, find a coach, find an administrator, speak about it after the fact. But silence is oftentimes, interpreted as acceptance, whether or not you agree with it or not. We have to be intentional about eradicating racism. This is not something that is going to happen by happenstance. This is not something that's just going to happen by good thoughts and well wishes. It takes action. It takes courage. And again, this is not a fight. Everyone doesn't fight in the same manner, but everyone can spread information. Whether that's in an anonymous email, a letter. You can say something. So see something, say something, and be intentional about getting racism out of here.
What you said about silence being acceptance is an amazing statement. I could put it on a t-shirt and wear it everywhere. So I think that was just a really, a really good thing that you said. It's just that also the idea of, I don't know if anybody heard this, but it's also important that we mention, it's not enough to be non-racist. We have to be anti-racist. And that's something that I've seen, repetitively. And that's something that I often think about when I see things happening. And I'm hoping that everyone also thinks the same thing. Like, as a society, the only way we can progress is to be anti-racist. It's not enough to just say, I'm not racist. Like, I'm not racist, but I'm not going to say anything about the person that's racist next to me. Like, we have to, address these things and hit them head on. Someone else asked something else in the chat. It's not specifically about inclusion and diversity. It's more so on the sports aspect. So they asked, do you have any advice for someone who's been trying their hardest in getting back into sports, but isn't a student and has limited experience in sports?
Wait, repeat the question one more time. I'm sorry.
So it says, do you have any advice for someone who has been trying their hardest in getting back to sports, but they aren't a student and they have limited experience with sports? So like any advice of how you can, get back involved in sports if you're not really, involved in, if they haven't been previously involved with sports and, they're no longer a student. So what can they do, to be involved? If you have any advice with that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of playing, I mean, it's never too late. I talked before about playing tennis growing up. When I started playing tennis, again, I was one of one. So my parents started playing tennis, and so they picked up that sport, at a much later age than I did. And so, just because you didn't get started early doesn't mean you can't get started later. And so there are leagues for people that are out of school. There are intramural leagues once you get into college. There's Zog sports leagues that are all throughout the city that have all different levels of experience from beginner all the way up to professional. And those leagues are available throughout your life. I know people in their 60s and 70s that are playing in these leagues and picking up new sports. And so, step outside the comfort zone. Be comfortable being uncomfortable, and you can jump back in there.
Great. Yeah, I love that motto, comfortable being uncomfortable. I think that's something I use daily. And so another question from the chat is for students currently on the call. Are there any articles that have helped shape your work?
Yes, I would say that there's a lot of books that have shaped the way that I think. One as an entrepreneur, two as a person in the diversity space, and three just as an athlete. And so some of those books, like I would say Phil Knight's autobiography is something that really drove me as an entrepreneur. The Mamba Mentality with Kobe Bryant also is something that has always driven me. And so like the type of books and things that I like to read are the ones that are about pushing beyond where you think that you can be, expanding where your limits are. It's the same mentality that you have when you are competing in sports and you are on the practice field or on the gym trying to get that last rep for that last little oomph to be able to control the outcome. It's the same thing as you're sitting there studying for your SATs or studying for school. And you're like, what? I got to read this one more time before I go in and take the test. And so podcasts and books of that nature that are about like truly pushing through and getting beyond where you actually are, the other type of things that I like to read and listen to.
I think what you said goes perfectly with our topic of sports as a life metaphor. Like you mentioned, me personally as an athlete, I mean, I don't want to run track in college, but I just know me personally, I like to get in that little extra work after practice. I think a lot of athletes are like that, whether they want to do it in college or not, or whether they want to go professional or not. So that just goes with the idea that even in life, we need to take that few extra minutes or few extra practices, be our best selves. So I think you answering that question really went well with our overall topic. We have another question in the chat that says, what is an example of a high-profile athlete who has exemplified this movement, and what have they done?
Which the social justice movement? Or
I'm assuming so, because they said what example of a high-profile athlete? Yeah, they said the social justice movement.
I mean, we can look at some of the athletes of today. We can look at LeBron James and look at how he started his more than a vote initiative to get people out to the polls, and started his charter school. We can look at Kyrie Irving, of the Brooklyn Nets, who is paying tuition for Black college students at Cheyney University to make sure that students can have a better better education. And then we can look at the athletes of yesterday, to where, I brought up Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell. And the fact, they were sitting at the Cleveland Summit, fighting for social justice issues, in the 60s. I think that all of the athletes of today that are pushing forward and pushing for a better tomorrow are children of the athletes of before. So, again, Muhammad Ali is someone that I look to, who has always, pushed, issues of social justice and encouraged me to do so. But the athletes of today are doing, an awesome job in leading the charge. I mean, we see the Black Lives Matter on the courts. We see game stoppage to make sure that awareness is being brought. And again, not everybody fights in the same way. Some athletes are more vocal than others. Some are behind the scenes. But I think that the men of the NBA and the women of the WNBA are at the forefront of leading this social justice charge. Laisha Clarendon of the New York Liberty, for example, was a champion of the Say Her Name movement and incorporating that into the WNBA. So yes, there are several athletes that are out there that are active, and it's encouraging to see the athletes of today really pushing for this change.
I think you mentioned some great names, and you start to see it throughout sports now. The effects of these athletes' voices and them using their platforms as they're slowly implicated, not only through sports, but also through everyday life. So another question we have here was, what was your experience like playing sports at a high level? And what did you overcome? And what did you do to overcome this diversity and the loneliness that comes with those who are in that position?
Man, I take the honest answer is I take pride in doing things that people don't expect for me to be able to do. And so, I mentioned being a tennis player. Like, I also play basketball and football, but I took tremendous pride in being a Black tennis player that was on top of the circuit in my basketball shorts as I played tennis, and really defying, what people thought when it came with that. So again, like, what drove me was proving people wrong. And yeah, it's a lonely feeling being out there on that tennis court for hours by yourself with just a bucket of balls. But it's also a lonely feeling at the top when you got your hands raised as a champion. And I was always fighting for that second lonely feeling. And I can deal with the loneliness of the adversity and all of that in getting there, if at the end of the day I can be a champion.
That was an amazing response. As far as our final question, we have, what do you think are some ways that the business side of sports can be more diverse or inclusive, or ways that sports jobs can be more accessible to people of all backgrounds?
I think conversations like this are helpful. When I grew up, everyone I knew wanted to be a professional athlete, but no one thought about wanting to have a job on the business side of sports. And I think a lot of that was a function of the fact that there were not a lot of people that looked like me in these roles. And you fast forward to today, and there's still not enough. There's still not enough representation, but there is enough representation to where it changes the way that people dream. It changes the way that people think and what they aspire to be. And so the more representation that we can have within sports, the more women that we can have in front office and in revenue producing roles on the business side of things, the more Black coaches that we can see across the professional landscape. All that does is breed the next generation of women executives in sports and Black coaches. And so the things that we can do is be intentional. Be intentional about having these conversations, be intentional in hiring practices, within organizations, and being intentional about creating access and pipelines, to be able to get into this space. And that's something that we work on a daily basis at BSE Global. That's something that Alton Bird and I talk about often. What are we doing to increase the pipelines and give access so that people can have these opportunities? And so you guys challenging these narratives and continuing to have these conversations and ask these questions, are all helpful in changing what that looks like and creating more access.
Well, Jackie, Amaya, Jaden, remarkable job. Amaya and Jaden, I don't know if you've done this before, but remarkable job in moderating this conversation with Jackie. We appreciate your hard work. Your questions were brilliant. And the way you managed the conversation, brilliant. I'm certainly planning on keeping you both in the pipeline for certainly the Long Island Nets or Nets gaming crew or some part of BSE Global. So I appreciate all of the questions that everyone asked. I wanted to make sure that I also said thank you to Rich McWalters, who's on our team, who's been, a real steward and a real kind of a real advocate for this platform, has really helped build this out. So thank you to Rich, thank you to Shannon Abrahall, thank you to Austin, all of our team that have put this together. Jeremy Thode, who's on here, who's been a part of us organizing this, Pat Pizzarelli, everybody who's been a part of this, thank you. I would encourage you to reach out to us. We are very easy to find at the Long Island Nets. All of us are responsive. This is a subject and a platform that Jackie has helped us build. And we will continue to have conversations every month. Our next one will be on March 16th at 6 p.m. with Joe Salomon, who oversees the Long Island Coalition Against Bullying. We're going to have a difficult conversation about how bullying impacts sports and how bullying really kind of presents itself on the playing field, off the playing field. And again, these conversations are not easy. They're not easy to have, and they're not ones that people want to have, but student athletes have raised their hands. Teachers have raised their hands. The athletic directors have raised their hands and said, this is important on Long Island. It's important in New York City, and it's important across the country. We're just the start of something that we hope builds a legacy to eradicate and erase racism as it presents itself in not just basketball, but in football, in field hockey, in volleyball, between student to student, between teachers and students, between parents and parents. We don't want to see it because sports is the great unifier. Sports is the one single thing that unifies this country and that people really enjoy doing. And they enjoy doing it in a competitive space. They don't expect to have racism be a part of it. So racism, bias, anything that rears its head that stops sports from being what it's supposed to be, enjoyable, family driven, and fun, is something we want to eradicate. We're starting on Long Island. Who knows? We may end up in California on the best coast. I'm from the West Coast, so I always say the best coast. But just remember that these conversations are meant for us to really kind of have these difficult conversations, ask the difficult questions, and really use the expertise that we're bringing to the table. So, Jackie, thank you for all that you've done tonight and for your advice and guidance. And thank everybody for joining us. Amaya, Jaden, brilliant job. Terrific. And thank you for really kind of taking care of putting this together. All right. For everybody, thanks. We'll see you literally on March the 16th at 6 o'clock. We're going to have the difficult conversation, Team Up for Unity, about bullying and how it presents itself in sports. Thanks, everybody. Make sure you have a good night.